Hello everyone. Recently, over the last few weeks at least, several people suggested to me in my I Suck at Cattleya's video that I need to raise my relative humidity. And I wanted to respond to that. Overall, in the grand scheme of orchid growing, especially with Cattleyas, I agree high humidity is a really big perk and it is pretty much crucial to their well-being. However, humidity really isn't something to take lightly. My grow space has some unusual factors that I have to keep into consideration in order to keep everything alive throughout the winter months. So a little bit of background about my grow space. My grow space is my garage. And where I live, it gets quite cold during the winter, but we have warm days too. But it just within the last few days, we were down to about 1 degree at nighttime, and we stayed below 20 for a few days. And the garage can only handle so much, even though I did insulate it. I have a couple of space heaters, but I don't have the ampage to put in an industrial 220 volt heater that would actually efficiently heat the entire space. And I have put in circulation fans. Still, average temperature in here ranges from about 44 to 65 during the winter months. And that's just not warm enough for 80% humidity. One of the main advantages to having a high humidity with your orchids is that wet air keeps your roots wet a little bit longer. So, in theory, then they will absorb more because it's not there's not drying out as quickly. You're not going to have as much desiccation in your roots. And that's all great if you're, above 70, 75 degrees into the 80s and 90s with good airflow. But what about when you're averaging about 55, 60 degrees, even dropping down to 42, 44 on extremely rare occasions? Well, when that's the case, high humidity is going to give you problems. Cold temperatures plus wet environment is a bad cocktail for tropical plants. Because these tropical plants aren't growing at the, I guess you say, faster rate they would be growing in their tropical environment with warm temperatures, if they're wet, that water just sits there, and they almost sort of shut down and aren't taking up water. They aren't taking up those nutrients, so they're just soaking there. This can lead to bacterial and fungal problems, specifically crown rot. If you have really high humidity and cold temperatures and water is getting into the crowns of your plants, then you can start to get fungal infections inside of all of your different cavities, apexes, crowns, whatever you want to call it. It's not a great idea. So, if you're in a situation like mine where you're growing your orchids, or at least overwintering them in what would be more of a temperate climate, dry and cool is always much better than cool and wet. I avoid cool and wet as much as possible, but man, they really do appreciate the humidity when I can provide them those high temperatures. But that's few and far between from, I'd say, mid-December through early March. Even with this, I believe, 750-gallon pond of water out here, my humidity, relative humidity, still ranges from about 39% to 55, 60% when I've watered heavily. And that's because the temperatures in here are cool, the water's cool because it takes way too much electricity to heat it, and cool water doesn't vaporize into the air as quickly as hot water. If you take a hot shower, it's steamy very quickly. You run cold water, the air is going to get wet, but it's not really going to get steamy. Your humidity is not going to raise as quickly. I also have to consider I have many other plants in here besides just orchids. Now, my orchids probably outnumber my tropical plants drastically, but I still have to take care of the tropicals. And plants like these Areca palms, they do not like being soaking wet when it's cold outside. It just leads to rot, kind of like what you're seeing here. This is, I believe, a sooty mold that's going on. It's being treated, and it's not going to kill the plant, but it potentially could cause crown rot should it get up here into the crowns of the plant. So, even more critically, these Robolini palms, or pygmy date palms, they do not like moisture sitting inside their crowns. So if the humidity is high and the temperatures are cold, it's just going to rot and I'm going to lose those. There are other palms that are a little bit more sturdy, like windmill palms. I have several of those out here. I don't worry about them as much, but as far as the orchids are concerned, I have to be very, very careful, look at them every day and try and understand what their needs are. And that is really the common ground I think that there is here, even though I'm growing these in a pretty unusual way. I have to check them every day. I have to observe them and try and understand what their needs are. I can see when they're in more of an active growth phase and know how to treat them accordingly. And do my best to not oversaturate them, but not over-dry them. It really is a dance at understanding the needs of our plants and kind of getting to know their growth nature and their growth habits. So, ultimately, yes, it would be good to have high humidity out here in my growth space. Probably around 70% would even be ideal. But it's just too risky with cool temperatures. I mean, I could just go buy a humidifier, but I don't really know what the point would be when it could potentially cause me to actually needing to treat a lot of my plants for fungal infections and rot. They seem to do better for me in this particular setup on the drier side. One of the cons, though, to this is that I know that there are types of plants I can't grow out here. The heliconias don't do well. They like really hot, humid environments. My coconut palms and Adenidia palms, they also like very warm, humid environments. These gingers down here, this is Alpinia Zurumbut variegata. Usually they don't do well. It's doing okay this year. I don't know why. I'm not going to question it. I'm not going to, be upset about a good thing. Normally, they also like the high heat and humidity. I'm not going to be able to grow things out here. I've always wanted Christosaki's Redna, the red's lipstick palm, or the sealing wax palm. They're gorgeous, but they need a lot of heat and humidity. Even the Missouri Botanical Gardens, which has a giant glass house for their tropical plants, and almost everything there flourishes, but their Christosaki's doesn't really look that great, despite the fact that it's cared for by experts in the heat. So there are some plants that I know just not to bring out here. Those plants being the truly tropical plants. Now, there are lots of other plants that are seemingly tropical or subtropical that do okay with the mild temperatures, like the Sago Palms, oleanders, queen palms, the mule palms, which is a hybrid between a queen palm and a Pindu palm. Can't really see them back there. Windmill palms do well. And then as far as orchids go, there are the deciduous orchids, the various dendrobiums that are deciduous that need a seasonal dry and cool down, and likewise the cymbidiums that need that dry cool down. They do very well. And catasetums. With my catasetums, I just, once they start to drop their leaves, I just kind of toss them back. And with my other plants where it's dark, and then bring them back out when it warms up and gets sunny enough to wake them up in the springtime, and they do well with that. So it really is a dance about understanding what you have, what you're working with, what you can provide for your plants, and what's really realistic, because I would love to have some extremely exotic plants out here. Having the Vandas out here is a challenge enough as it is, because they don't like cool temperatures and low humidity, just like the heliconias. They need really wet, blowy, windy, warm environments, and I do the best that I can. I haven't lost any in the winter, unless they were maybe a cutting I purchased that just didn't have enough roots, and they weren't in a high enough active growth period to really get them going. Otherwise, everything does okay. Even my cattleyas that I said I sucked at growing are all making a pretty good bounce back. Those roots, those have at least doubled in size in the last week, which is pretty quick compared to what I've seen out of my other cattleyas in the past. And then you might be asking, well, why don't you keep your Vandas and your really heat-loving plants inside? I would like to, but I don't have any practical place to hang my well over 100 Vandas at this point, and I don't have any south-facing windows that receive much sunlight, and I have a lot of cats and dogs, and they are jerks to my plants. They love to chew them up. My dogs don't. They don't get on the counters, but the cats, I tell them not to, but they don't listen. They do whatever they want to. They're cats. It's what cats do. And I have learned my lesson every single winter. I haven't learned my lesson. I have observed that every single winter I make the same mistake, which is at some point I get paranoid about some of my certain plants, such as hibiscus and bromeliads and the heliconias. I overwater them, and then they slowly wither away and die because it's too cold out here for them, and they're not taking up that water. They just sit in it, and it rots out their root systems or their rhizome bulbs. It depends on the various types of plants. So I have to make sure I let them dry out all the way and keep a close eye on them. Bromeliads, I always have a very hard time getting to survive the winters. I've done it before. They do better in the house, but this year I'm being very careful. I'm only watering them when they start to look dry, which technically is too late, but I think that that's a better way to avoid overwatering them. Ultimately, in the long run, we will see if that works out. And a really good example of what I'm talking about are my agaves. Here, up there. I bring these in here every single winter. I just plop them down. They don't even get very much sunlight, and they do wonderfully. The shocker here is I don't water them. They might get hit with a little water occasionally, but basically it's temperatures are cool. I don't know if I'd call them cold, but generally 55 degrees isn't warm enough to be giving these guys a ton of water, and they do better drier when they're cold. When they're outside and it's hot outside, I give them water. They show a pretty drastic change in how they grow. These respond to the climate a little bit better, unlike tropical orchids, which don't have a dormancy period. So they don't recognize, oh, it's cold, I should stop growing. They want to keep growing. So they have to accommodate. And here we have a Vanda Cachoeira Delight that has just gone into spike. Its roots are dry, not brittle, but they are dry. I don't water this very much, and it's doing better than my Vandas that I water all of the time. So what I thought I knew, turns out I didn't. There's something else going on here. All these Vandas over here have been getting minimal water, and I think they actually look better than the ones that are under the grow lights in a warmer spot with higher humidity and get watered roughly 3 times a day. But, I mean, it's very quick watering. I soak their roots down till they're nice and green, and then I repeat that a few times, keep them wet for a while, and let them dry out. So, long story short, it's not ideal, but I'm doing my best, learning the environment and what makes the plants tick. Why this is in bud, I don't know. Some people call them stress blooms. I don't really know if I fully believe that that's really a thing. And it's putting out new growth. That's not typically a plant does when it's stressed. So your plants know the environment you're growing them in, and generally things will be much better. Oh, so sad. Well, that was in bloom for a long time. Okay, that's all for today. Happy gardening, everybody.